over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one and walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. Hello everyone. Today I'm speaking with Rebecca. Rebecca, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. And yourself?
I'm good. Busy as always, but it's just sort of the nature of the beast anymore.
Yes, it is. I understand that.
For those who haven't heard Rebecca's interview, we talked a few years back on another show that I won't name, but you and I grew up actually fairly close to one another, kind of during the same time period. So there was a lot of stuff going on in the Graham-Spanaway area back throughout the 70s that a lot of people weren't aware of, and I'm still hearing from people occasionally that saw things. So what I'm going to do is just kind of give you the microphone and tell everyone, kind of from the start what happened, and sort of lead us through everything.
Well, there's so much. I mean, would you like to know about my first encounter and how that kind of came about, and start from that beginning? Because right. I could talk for days on all the stuff that I've experienced.
Well, let's start with that first encounter, because I think that's one of the more compelling ones.
Right, and yeah, exactly. Well, I was born in Kansas, and my dad and mom moved us to Klamath Falls, Oregon for 4 years. My dad was in the service, and once he retired, we moved to Washington State in Pierce County. My father bought a house. Well, kind of unbeknownst to us, and something that, I really didn't find out for a few years down the road. But the buyers were very motivated to sell. Now, this was in Pierce County. I don't know, Will, should I, give the area? Or I think I have before on a previous show, correct?
I think that's okay, because, a lot of that stuff happened a long time ago, and the area's changed so much. I know that's an understatement, right?
Well, it's more developed, but as far as activities goes,
there are still things that go on.
Yes. But, that was in, for anybody who's familiar, or if they want to look it up, it's kind of the intersection of Highway 7 that would be called Mountain Highway and 224th. And Highway 7, leads down toward, even though you can take that road to get to Mount Rainier, if you take 224th, you're going out to Graham. That takes you to the Graham area. And so this house that my dad purchased was like 3 houses, right off of Mountain Highway or to Highway 7 onto 224th. And it just was, at that time, it was all woods, everywhere woods. And just a heavily, densely forested area. And the property that my dad bought, the house that he bought, came with 5 acres of densely wooded property. And as well, the neighbors, houses, everything around us. I mean, when we came out the back door of this house and we were looking at the house, I still remember this. It's like you're stepping out, you open up the back door and there's the woods. And when we lived in Klamath Falls, Oregon, we weren't surrounded by woods right there where we were at. And so it was kind of a weird feeling. And I can tell you that, myself personally, I kept getting just a weird feeling. But I thought, it's just because I was only 7 years old. I'm thinking, it's just because, we're not used to woods because the trees were so tall and they were so dense that it was gloomy. It literally was dark all around us. That's how densely wooded it was. It was dark, okay? Even in the daylight, it was gloomy. But I remember when we moved in that house, and from the very first night we spent the night there, we kept hearing stomping sounds, and, I remember getting up in the morning, I'm like, Mom, did you, hear all that noise out there, Yeah, your father says it's deer, and you're thinking, oh dear, okay, it's okay, well, if Dad says it's deer, and I'm like, deer can stomp like that, Well, I don't know, that's what, this is the conversations that went on. Well, I don't know, that's what your father says, sometimes, there could be elk out there too, and your father says deer, elk and stuff stomp, and I said, but Mom, like the ground's vibrating, they can do that? Well, maybe they were running. And I'm like, well, it sounded like they were walking. Becky, go do your housework, you better do your chores, you're going to get in trouble from your dad, this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm to ask questions, but I never really did get any answers. Well, the reason that my father bought that property is because, as I said before, the owner was extremely motivated and had taken, an unusual amount off the price of the house to get out of there. Yeah, I found it interesting too, because I didn't know it till later, and then when you kind of grow up and you're looking back, isn't it funny how if you've had a childhood where things like this have happened, I don't know, Will, if you went that far back on that, but looking back, I can tell you, it's like everything is always looking back, and you're like, oh, wow, now I'm connecting the dots. Exactly. Now I'm seeing this and that, that I didn't understand then. I made no comprehension of it whatsoever. And at that time, my father made us do chores, and we had to be outside. So, I had to help, clear trees. He had my 2 brothers and me out there because I was a tomboy. And he would make us clear. He would start sawing down big oak trees, okay? He was cutting and chopping down trees. We got a wood splitter. We spent, an entire year cutting down trees in that backyard to clear that entire 5-acre piece of property so we could fence it, because my sister and I were begging for horses, and my father decided, okay, well, I'm going to buy motorcycles, and I'm going to buy, horses, and that'll keep these kids outside, because I'll be darned if they're going to stay in and watch TV all the time, He was real strict on that. But let me go back a little bit. The weekend when we moved in the following weekend, and I believe it was a Saturday, but it's a long time ago. I really do. I think it was a Saturday. We all of us went directly across the street from our house. And at that time, it was heavily densely wooded, forested, county-owned land that had never been used, and nobody ever went out there. So we went across the street, and we went down into that ditch, and we went out into that forest. I don't know, I'd say somewhere between 40 and 50 feet in. And it was just all moss. It was all moss. Well, we were standing there, and all of a sudden we started realizing that there were huge footprints all over the place. I mean, there were different sizes of footprints, but they were really big footprints. And, you know, some were leading off to the right and going off as far as we could see into the densely, you know, just everywhere. You could see these trails of these big footprints. And all of us kind of started not exactly running away from each other, but we were just kind of walking away. We're all standing together, but all of us kind of like looking around in amazement. And I remember I kind of walked away from my parents, maybe, I don't know, 25, 30 feet. And I saw this huge footprint, and I actually dropped down in the moss onto my knees. And I was just tracing it with my finger, and I was just looking at it, and I put my hand in it, and I just could not believe it. I was like, what? What is this? You know what I mean? I'm 7 years old. I'm 7 years old. So, you know, I didn't know what a Bigfoot was. Never heard the terminology. I'd never heard one person ever mention it in Oregon. To my level of understanding, there was never such a creature, and there was never such a name, and there was never such a creature. It didn't exist, and I had no knowledge or conception of that. So I'm trying to make, you know, like, what is this? And then I remember my mom, you know, she was saying to my dad, you know, she said, Jim, what are these prints? What is this? You know, and my dad, you know, when he couldn't explain something, it's like, I'll believe it when I see it kind of guy.
Sure. And
he got frustrated, you know, and I think my father was bipolar, because sometimes he snapped and he really got angry a lot. And he was like, Louise, I don't know, you know, I don't know, let's go. You know, it made him mad. And he goes, there's probably somebody with something on their foot, and they're walking. This is what he told us. Somebody walking around out here and with different sized feet and putting stuff on their feet, and they're trying to scare somebody. Okay, really? Of course, like, again, I'm 7 years old, and later on, you know, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Why would anybody put something on their feet and walk around and make these kind of prints when nobody ever went out here? You know, plus on top of that, there was a kind of a funky, I remember this, it was kind of a foulish, funky smell. It wasn't really strong to the point where it'd make you sick, but it was kind of hanging in the air. And, you know, once again, you know, after years and years down the road, you're going, oh, my Lord, that thing was out there. Or they were, you know, probably out there watching us.
Probably close by.
Yeah, I mean, but you think, you know, of course, here again, none of us know anything. So we went back across the house because we're looking at this, and my dad's got the idea that we're going to take rakes and we're going to take a hoe out there, and each Saturday we're going to make a project. And as we're fencing, you know, the back 5 for horses, we're going to go across the street and spend some time every weekend digging and hoeing, and we're going to make trails for motorcycles and horses, right? Because it's perfect. You can the county's not using it. They're not going to care. It's not fenced, you know, and it's perfect, you know. So we're trying to do all this, you know, and we were never harmed. But like, once again, I'm looking back and I'm thinking somebody wasn't very happy that we were cutting down all the trees.
You probably not.
You know, that's what I'm thinking. So, but in any event, so we had a lot of strange things. I would hear branches breaking at night. I was always woke up in my sleep. Branches breaking, stomping around, scraping on the side of the house, you know, things of that nature. And And then we got the horses. And, things continued, and then we started to notice that there was this howling, kind of a howling, I'm going to call it a howl, every night, every evening at sunset. Mm-hmm. Every evening at sunset, when the sun was going down, these howls, and it would go on and on for maybe, I don't know, I'm going to say 10 minutes, and then it stopped. Once the sun went down, and once it was dark, it stopped. But, you always, even as a kid, any kid's going to hear something like that, and you're like, what is that,
Right.
But we never knew, never knew. And I asked my mom, and she didn't have any answers, and so in any event, we went on with our lives, and my dad was strict, and we had to have homework in, and, just, you're busy with your life. We're still trying to clean up the, leftover wood, that they need to be split, logs that were, out in the pasture, and fence posts that somehow, on occasion, would find themselves. And I don't know if I told you this. I think I did in the last show, but it's been a long time, Will. Mm-hmm. But those fence posts and some of those cut up chunks of trees would find themselves scattered somehow, or they would be thrown on the other side of the pasture.
So they were stacked up, and then you'd find them tossed around.
Yeah, because my dad was military, and he was really meticulous. And everything, we got in trouble if our house, we had to have quarters bounds off our beds, and he'd do inspections on us. But let me tell you what, when he did the fences, before he left the project, or that we went home, back into the house, all those fence posts and everything had to be stacked nice and neat until they were all used up, or he decided what he was going to do with them, right? Mm-hmm. Well, he started accusing us, me or the boys, of playing around and throwing those posts around, and it's like, why would we do something like that? But that was his logic. It's like, you kids better stop messing around with these posts and, throwing them around. And he goes, I'm going to get the belt out if if it doesn't quit, this kind of deal. It's like, Dad, we didn't do it, and it's like, why would anybody come in here? Why would somebody come in here? You know what I mean? Still, being ignorant meaning we didn't know. Sure. I had no knowledge of what was going on. I'm looking back once again, and I'm like, exactly. They're all over that pasture, but, and so in any event, so here we go to 1969. I'm just going to jump forward. I'm just trying to kind of set the stage for it, hearing all sorts of stuff. I know what it was that I forgot to tell you. So my dad just notices that we got deer around, and he likes animals, so he decides to take our horses alfalfa and put it in the backyard that's open, You can just come off the street and just walk around the back of the house, And he put a salt lick out there and a tub of water, and he put, bales of alfalfa out there, and we can just watch the deer now, and they'll come and eat, and we'll just feed them, Well, sometimes Bigfoot like to eat deer, sometimes they'll take deer. And I don't know if that was an attraction, So this was, there you go. See, so it was 1969, and it was in October, and we had an early snow. It snowed early, and it wasn't a big snow. It was only it was about maybe just a blanket. I'm going to say maybe a half an inch, and it was already, kind of, it was crusty, but it was already starting to melt a little bit. It hadn't been snowed the night before, and it was already starting to dissipate a little bit, But I had gone out and ridden my horse like I did I come home from school and I do my chores, and then I'm like, I was horse crazy, so I'm like, I got to go ride my horse. So I did everything I was supposed to do, so I didn't get in trouble. And I'm out there saddling that horse up, and I'm gone, and I'm going to ride. I get to go ride for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then I got to get that horse cooled down, brushed down, and cleaned up, because my dad was really strict about the grooming and the care of horses. So he taught us, you're going to do this right, or I'm going to sell these horses. So anyway, I get him all put away, cooled down, and I get him fed, and by then, it's like 4:30, somewhere in there. And it was kind of where, you guys know what I'm talking about, where it's starting to get dark, but it's still light.
Right.
And it's kind of like, I want to call it twilight.
Exactly.
It's just kind of, but you can still see.
Where it's just kind of changing.
Yes, exactly. There you go. It's just kind of changing, and it's a little bit more on the darkest side, but you can still see. You can still see everything, Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, there was this show I like to watch, and I'm sure you're going to laugh when I tell you, because I think I told you anyway before, that show. Does anybody remember the show F Troop?
Right.
Okay, so I like to laugh. My dad was really strict, and sometimes we lived a kind of a hard life, and then that was something I like to watch. I like to laugh. So I run in there, I wash my hands, and I run in there, and I grab a wooden chair, and I drag it to this big picture window of the house that faced 224th, which faced directly across the street in that county property. Now, also I want to stop for a second and remind you, Will, until you remember that the Fort Lewis Reservation is to my right of that house.
Yeah, it's just on the other side of the mountain highway.
I mean, if you look it up, if you Google Earth it, it's like, a city block and a half? I mean, it's literally right there.
Yeah, the fence parallels the highway there, and the signs, they say that's a military reservation.
Yeah, that's correct. And it runs for miles and miles and miles.
Oh, yeah.
And I would go in there with my horse. And I had a few interesting incidences out there. And I probably shouldn't have been riding my horse alone, but I did it all the time. Probably wasn't the best idea. But in any event, so I took that chair and I drug it up to the picture window, and I leaned the chair back on two legs, and I'm leaning against the window. I've got my shoulders, over the top of the back of that chair, and I'm leaning against the window, and I've got my arms crossed, and I'm watching this, and I'm getting into the show, and I'm laughing. Well, I'm laughing, and I look, outside, and it's just, I don't know how to explain this to anybody. I mean, it has to make sense to somebody out there, or maybe to you, but it's like I saw it, but I didn't see it. And as I'm looking forward, I looked back, and all of a sudden my brain flashed something in my head. I saw a picture that flashed. This is what you just saw, and I saw the image of this thing. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, did I just see something? Is that what I just saw? Is there something out there? And my mind's beginning to race, and I'm like, what? And I'm realizing that I just saw something. Well, so I thought, okay, I'm trying to, by then I'm 14 years old, okay? And by then I'm trying to process this whole thing. And I'm like, you have to look. You have to look. This is what I'm telling myself. You have to look. You can't not look. There's something there. You have to see it. You have to look. And so I slowly turned my head, and there was this creature standing right at the window. Now, the only thing between that plate glass window and me was this little brick. See, way back in the 50s, in the 60s, they used to build these houses where sometimes they would build planter boxes.
Yeah, right.
Right up against the house, right? And it was made of brick, and it was only like, I don't know, a foot and a half or I don't even know if it was 2 feet.
Yeah, they weren't very big.
Yeah, they weren't very big, but it was just this little planter box that was made of brick, and it had been built right up against the house. And that was the only thing between me and that thing, and it was leaning over, staring at me, and I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on because, and I started to feel I remember to this day, I could feel the blood just draining from my face. And I think I was going into shock. I think that's basically what was happening to me. Back then, I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know why I couldn't move. I was so terrified. I was in so much fear. I tried to move, and I couldn't move. And we just locked eyes. And I saw before me this huge creature that was gray. He was gray, and he had red eyes. And he looked really disgusted. I don't know how else, kind of a meanish, piercing, like staring at me really intently. Now, I don't know if I caught him by accident, but from all the experience that I've had up until this day, I really have to retract that and say, I don't think that, at one point in time I'd said maybe I caught it by accident, or I agreed with other people that it was trying to get past me and I caught it by accident. I have to retract that, because I think that they let you see them when they want to be seen.
Sure.
And so for some reason, this one, I don't know if he'd been following me around on my horse while I've been riding. I don't know the answer to that, but I couldn't move and I couldn't get out of that chair, and I thought it was going to kill me. Here I was at 14 years old, and my mind could work, but my muscles, my neck, my shoulders, I couldn't get out of the chair. And I kept saying, leap. I kept telling myself, get out, just go, just jump. And it's like the muscles wouldn't move. My body would not respond. So I was paralyzed. I had to have been, but I could not move. I was literally frozen right there in that spot, looking at that thing. And he was looking down at me. My dad was a burly man. He was a big, burly man, and this thing made my dad look like a midget. I mean, that's how I felt at that time. I mean, my dad was small compared to this thing, and he had cannonball shoulders, just cannonball. They were huge shoulders, you know. And I mean, I was absolutely, you know. And so I realized that I could look, you know, and I could look at him, and I started just studying him. You know, I broke my eye contact with him, but I still couldn't move. And I just started letting and it didn't move, and it still didn't move. And I was looking at his shoulders, and I was looking at his chest, and I let my eyes go down and look at his arms, and I suddenly realized his arms, you know, went down below his knees. And I noticed, you know, how muscular this thing really was, and how his torso was bigger, disproportionate. See, now I can say it after all these years and all this experience, but it was, I noticed how his legs were not as long for the size of his body that I thought it should be.
Right.
So here you've got this massive muscular torso, these cannonball shoulders, these long arms, you know, and he was this gray color with little pieces of like lighter gray, almost white, along his neck, and a few wisps of it in the top of his chest. And then he was covered with these sparse brown and black hairs all over him. It was on his arms and everything. You know, I noticed that on his knuckles, you know, some of the hair it was thinner on the top of his hands, and they were turned, you know, to the back of him. They were turned to the back. They weren't turned to the side. They were turned to the back. But I could see that his skin was like a dark gray. His skin was a dark gray. And here I'm looking at this thing, and this thing still isn't moving. But when I first saw him, I mean, he was just heaving, and there was steam coming out of, his nostrils. There was steam just coming out, and he had hair all over his face. This guy was hairy. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was long hair. And he wasn't, the curious thing about it is that, I don't know, when I first did a show, I don't remember now. Was that the last show I did with you? Was that in 2012?
I believe so, yes.
That was with, that other show. But there was that. I don't remember everything that I said to you then. I'm trying to recall everything that I said to you. But there was,
right.
there was, this thing did not, a lot of people say, if you tell them, well, he wasn't matted and muddy and there wasn't clumps of dirt all over him. Mm-hmm. If I say this thing looked, like he was not dirty. He wasn't, didn't look exactly like he'd been groomed with a comb, but he wasn't matted. His hair wasn't wrapped around itself and matted. Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to why that was. I don't understand, I don't know. I still to this day don't know why, and I never really questioned it. It was what it was, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's just what I saw. And so I thought I was going to die that day. I thought it literally could have just taken its arm and lifted its arm and broke the glass and just taken my head off. And here my mom and my sisters are in the kitchen talking away, chattering, they're getting ready for dinner. My dad expected that, we had to have dinner on a certain time. And I'm hearing them and I can't even say help. I couldn't even speak to say, somebody please help me, come quickly. There was nothing I could do. And it just stood there and looking at me with these red eyes. And I felt like he was looking right through me. Kind of like you're locking eyes with somebody and you get the overall feeling. To me, it felt like he was looking at me like he knew all about me. It was a crazy feeling. I felt like he was just looking right into my soul. And there was nothing I could do. I couldn't get away. And finally, after I don't know how long I sat there like that, I kept talking to myself, get out, just get out, just jump out of the chair. I kept telling my mind, you can do that. I was in gymnastics. I was very, I was very athletic. And I couldn't move. I'm telling myself, get out, just jump out of the chair, just get out, just back up, fall on the floor, do anything, get out of that chair, get away from that thing, And finally, after, I don't know how long, I could feel my muscles contracting in my hands, in my fists, Mm-hmm. And after that, I was able to, but I told myself, you got to turn your head first. You can't jump until you turn your head away from that thing. Do you know how scared I was? If anybody could even begin to fathom what that felt like as a kid, 14-year-old kid.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing something that they never knew existed and something that gigantic, to try to turn your head away from it when it's standing there and try to get away from it.
Especially
that's so frightening that I'm sure that you understand that, what that might have felt like. And so I was able finally to, stumble out of the chair. And when I stood up, I just stood there for a minute, and then I finally stumbled to the kitchen, and my mom comes around the corner, and she goes, Rebecca? Hey, Rebecca, what's wrong with you? She goes, and then my sister came around. Well, what's the matter with you? What's the matter? Look at her. She's white as a sheet. What's wrong with you? And I still couldn't talk. And then I started to cry. And it's like a letdown, the finally being able, and I just bawled, and I still couldn't talk. I just convulsively bawled for I don't know how long. And I finally said, that thing out there, and they're like, what thing out where? You know what I mean? And by that time it had gone. It was gone by then. And so my mom, I told her what I'd seen, and she's like, what, and she would just kept staring at me like, what are you talking about, And I'm like, it's out there, it was out there, I saw it, And so she went out there and she goes, well, I'm going to go out there and look behind. No, Mom, don't go out there. Don't go out there. Please don't go out there, This is what I was going through. I mean, literally, please don't go. Please don't look at you. Please, Mom, don't go out there, And so she did. She went out there anyway, and she found, where there was mud, the ground had been disturbed, and she goes, well, there is something out here. So, I mean, there was something out here, but I don't know what it was. And she just kind of dismissed it,
Oh, yeah.
And, and the crazy thing about this whole deal is my father and my two brothers were in the backyard chopping wood. So guess what? That thing had to have come from across the street, okay? Had come across the street and took a look at me, or come from the side of the house where the woods were and looked at me then, and taken off either to the side of the house into the woods next to the house, or gone back across the street. Because as I turned my head, I heard a car screech to a halt. And it's like you're hearing something in your brain, but you're just, I was so terrified. All I wanted to do is get away. But I remember hearing a car skidding to a halt and then taking off real fast.
Wow.
And then once again, looking back, I'm thinking that thing took off in front of somebody. Somebody saw it. They took off across the street, went back over there, and it ran right out in front of somebody. So somebody else saw it. But nobody else ever did come to the house and knock on the door and say, "Can I talk to you?" No, that never happened. Yeah, but back then you got made fun of. You didn't bring up stuff like that. Like saw something, And I tried to talk to my mom later, and she's like, I don't know if we need to talk about this. I don't want you, your father to catch you and I talking about something like that, because it's going to make your dad mad, and then you're going to scare the other kids too. And you need to stop talking about this right now, And I said, but Mom, thing is, and so here we go, and it's the next morning. I'm like, Mom, wake up. Mom, can you go with me to feed the horses? Please, you walk out there with me to feed the horses. I mean, literally, it was like that. Please, I don't want to go alone. Please, that thing might get me, Mom. So you know what your dad said? If he catches you not feeding that horse at 6:00, he's going to sell your horse. And I cried. I was terrified, And so I would pray to God, and I would say, God, please help me, protect me, send your angels to protect me, because I don't want to die out there, please help me, And I would just take one step in front of the other, because I love those horses so much. I loved horses so much. The last thing in the world I ever wanted is for my dad to sell my horses, And so I went out there. My mom went out there a few times with me, but she was busy with the other kids, and there was school, and she just, like, come on out there, you're all right, that kind of deal. So that's what I did, but every day for a long time was like terror to me. And I quit doing anything. I didn't want to go out in the woods. I didn't want to ride my horse out in the woods. And then 6 weeks later, it was about 6 weeks later, it was on a Saturday morning. It was actually, it was clear. It wasn't rainy. It wasn't, And I'm sitting there Indian style, and back then, girls my age played paper dolls, and I know that sounds stupid now, but back then it was a different era, and you did different things. And I was very, my dad was very strict and very protective, and we weren't allowed to go anywhere or do anything much. We had our horses and motorcycles, and, we were expected to, live this sheltered life. Well, so I was sitting here Indian style, facing in my sister's room, and in her room was a large window that was the bedroom window that faced out toward the horses, the back 5, and then the other window on the other corner, faced the side of the house, and there was woods there too. Well, I'm sitting here playing paper dolls, and my sister starts arguing with me about, which doll or which wardrobe piece she wanted to put on her doll, because I'd picked it up, and she started arguing with me. And I went to talk to her and say, what are you doing? How come I can't have that? And here goes, my sister's back was turned to that window. And I just, I keep asking myself, why me? why couldn't have my sister been sitting in a different place where she could have seen that too? But she didn't see it. She felt the vibration, but she didn't see it. And here goes a smaller one, A smaller one. Well, I'm sitting Indian style on the floor. I think the window was probably, I'm thinking, I don't remember now. It was like 2.5 feet up from the floorboard. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting on the floor, right? So this thing just casually lopes by. Boom, 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 arms swinging, and I'm looking at the side of its face, and it looked just like its dad, the same color. It had chunky little arms, beefy, and its little nose was kind of pushed in. It didn't have a lot of hair on its face like Dad did. It was more fuzzy. It's more fuzzy, but it was still, the same color. And he didn't even look in the window at me. Just went on by his business, run right by the bedroom, and I'm just following it with my face. If you can imagine, looking at my face with my mouth open, and I'm looking in utter shock, and I'm watching this run past, not fast, just kind of run past, boom, 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 past the window and then the other window, and I don't know where it went. I don't know if it went across the street or it went farther into the woods, once it got past the house. I don't know where it went, but I just sit there and I was looking out the window. And I was just staring like in my head, I was thinking, I can't believe this. There's more than one. And my sister looked at me, she goes, what's the matter with you? And I looked at her and I said, Roxanne, I said, didn't you feel that? She goes, I don't know, yeah, what was that? And I just looked at her and I thought, I knew I was going to get in trouble for my dad, and I just looked at her and I go, never mind, let's just play, and she goes, what? And I go, never mind, okay, just never mind. I thought I saw something. That's what I told her. I thought I saw something. Well, what did you see? Nothing, let's just play. And I never did tell her.
Wow. Yeah,
never did tell her. I never did. Because, well, what could I say? If I told her, she'd go tell my mom, and then my mom would tell my dad, or if she told one of my brothers, my brother goes straight to my dad. And, guess what? My dad's going to pull the belt out, and guess who's going to be standing there?
Mm-hmm,
Exactly. And I knew I had to keep my mouth shut, and I was terrified. I was like, why am I seeing this? Oh, my Lord, my poor horses. I wonder if they're going to hurt my horses. Oh, my gosh, there's more than one. You mean there's a family out here? My mind was racing. And so went to the school library. Once I could get a hold of myself, I thought, there's any information? Does anybody know anything? How come there isn't anything on the news? What is going on? How come I'm seeing this and I don't hear anybody talking about anything? What is this thing? So I go to the school library. I think it took me like 2 weeks after school, because I'd stay after school for gymnastics, a couple times a week. And I found this book. Way in the back. It was an old ratty book. And there's a picture of, what's the name of that book?
Wasn't that Ivan Sanderson's book? Because I'm pretty sure we probably saw the same book in the same school.
Yeah, it might have been Ivan Sanders, and it showed a white Bigfoot, and it was about and it was called out in the Himalayas, but it wasn't called Bigfoot.
Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life.
Abominable Snowman, that's what it was. Abominable Snowman.
Wasn't it the only book Bethel had on the subject?
Yes, Will, it was this book. I can't believe you saw the same one. I couldn't believe they actually had that book. I saw it.
I checked the same book out after I found footprints out in Graham and had my own sighting.
That is so funny. Well, that's the book, and I checked it out, and I would sit there in astoundment, and I hid it. I checked it out, and I hid it, and I hid it so my dad and my mom wouldn't find it, and I would go in my room and I would just open it up and look at it, and I started to cry, and I'm like, and I know this sounds, you can laugh about this, now. But I said to myself, how did that thing, seriously, this is what I thought. How did that thing get all the way from the Himalayas into my backyard? Because I didn't know. It's funny, it's hilarious now. But back then I was terrified. It was like, it came over here, why did it come to my house, you know? And I didn't understand that they're all around me. I didn't know that the forest around me and the Fort Lewis, you know, was chock full of them, and still is, by the way, and the military knows it too, which is one of the reasons why it's now fenced, but you'll never get that out of them.
Sure.
It wasn't to keep people out. It was to try to keep something in, and there's other stories I've got about that fence.
Well,
but
listen, we are running a little short of time. I'd like to do a second part because you have a lot more to talk about.
Oh, okay. I do talk too much, don't I? I spend a lot of time explaining.
That's great. Would that be okay with you?
Sure. That would be fine.
Okay, well, we'll plan on that.
Just remind me where I left off.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I was thinking, because I remember you telling me so much more, and I thought, okay, since we're running short on time, this is a great place to stop because it'll be easy to remember where we stopped.
There's a lot more. You can ask me about the camping trailer.
Oh yeah, the trailers and some other stuff.
My brothers who decided to pitch a tent, and him and some friends went out in that county property across the street and pitched a tent and decided they were going to have a sleepover. Oh yeah.
Well, let's definitely do that then.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.